and welcome to episode 259 of the Small and Supercharged podcast with Ria Freeman. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Small and Supercharged podcast. It is a solo with me and we are going to be talking all about rebrands today because I've been on the radio a little bit over the last, few weeks talking about one of the most interesting rebrands I've ever seen, which is Twitter, which is now X. And that's what we're going to talk about. I don't really know where to start with this. I've got notes and everything. But it has been a really interesting rebrand. Definitely one that sort of breaks all the rules that you normally attribute to rebrands, which we're going to go through a bit today. And I think that's what makes it interesting because there clearly is a strategy behind it. You know, Elon Musk is an incredible entrepreneur. He has done amazing things. He is the richest man in the world. He is responsible for Tesla and all sorts of things. So we do need to give him significant credit generally, but I am really interested to see how X/Twitter develops, changes, evolves, matures, alters as we go. And I know the plan isn't just for Twitter to stay as Twitter. I believe he has talked about how he wants to create an everything app, and that is going to be a super interesting thing to see and how that evolves. So it's definitely a watch this space, but I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about rebrands, why you rebrand, why you might want to, things that generally we see when we analyse rebrands, if you do, because that's the kind of thing I do, and why that's important, and also how to sort of stack the odds in your favour to have a successful rebrand that people really get and love. And I have seen a lot of rebrands over time, and some have gone down well. Usually if it's something quite dramatic, people will argue against it. They'll say why it's not needed. But generally, there have been some really successful ones. One of the biggest pushbacks I remember, I won't name names because that's not fair, and the details are slightly sketchy because it was a few years ago, but there was an organisation that rebranded, and it allegedly cost a huge amount of money at a time when the optics on spending a huge amount of money on something that wasn't vastly different weren't terribly well received. And that can be an issue when you do a rebrand, not if you are a normal company, but if you are an association, a charity, a sort of not-for-profit. Obviously how you spend your money is analysed, and whilst a rebrand can cost you nothing or it can cost you a huge amount of money, that's something to be really aware of in terms of the messaging, what that's saying, and if that is likely to really help the association, charity, non-for-profit in a way that's going to help them spread their message, to get more funds in, to do something positive that isn't just about ego. Whereas the beauty of being a company that is owned by, there's there to make profit, is that if actually that's what your ego and your team agree, you can do what you want. Now, before I get into this, I just wanted to give a little shout out to the Small and Supercharged Mastermind group. We do deep dives on all sorts of topics each month. We have a marketing masterclass each month alongside mindset masterclasses. Really interesting one this month, actually, with Tracy Cole, our fabulous NLP lady. And we have Jane Brindley also provide mindset masterclasses that are always thought-provoking. We also do meta trainings. I'm a meta lead trainer, so we have some meta trainings. We have live Q&As every week. We have, opportunities I post in there, chats, tea break Tuesdays, loads of things go into there to help small businesses particularly grow and develop. So do have a look at riafreemanpr.co.uk. Head to the top and you should see Small and Supercharged Mastermind, and that is where you can find out all about the membership group. And if you're not a member of the free group, which is just called Small and Supercharged, don't forget to become part of that. That's a really lovely community group that will help support you in your growth as well. Now let's get down to rebrands. are rebrands a good idea? We've talked about X to Twitter or Twitter to X, which is an interesting one. And as we kind of move through this, obviously rebrands happen all the time. Not that long ago, I say not that long ago, it was probably about 2 years ago now, Facebook changed to Meta, which is another, example. But we can also see lots of rebrands, not necessarily as dramatic as that, not in terms of the name, but in terms of the visuals and the brand assets that company has. Now, why do we do this? Why do we even bother to rebrand? Because is there any point? When you look at the ones who do significant rebrands, there's usually things that provide the reason to have such a dramatic rebrand. And even with a minor rebrand, some of these still apply. So the first thing you need to do is think about why you're doing it. Don't just do it because you're bored and you're a bit quiet and you think, it'd be good, a rebrand. It's a lot of time and potentially a lot of money. Because when companies rebrand, when big companies rebrand, it's not that you tweak the logo and think, there we go, that's good. There will be times, or there could be times when it's on all the stationery, websites, socials, logos, on clothing for your team if you've got, a physical bricks and mortar presence. It's literally in everything. The sides of lorries. It can be a really expensive exercise just because you're a bit bored. So always have that why in mind, because that is actually going to be very important to not only justifying the expenditure and the time, but when you start to share this message with your people, with your fans, your followers, your customers, your stakeholders, you need to have that why in mind, because you need people to buy into this. You might not think you do, but it's a whole lot easier if people get it and they're excited and they're supportive of it. Now, when we think about the main why, it's usually to show an evolution, a development, or a change. So this could be that your company has gone in a different direction. It could be that you're bringing new things on board. It could be that you want to develop beyond the current sort of confines of what your brand is well known for. That makes sense. It could be that due to your company's growth, perhaps you need an overarching brand and then you have the sub-brands underneath it rather than a sub-brand being the overall brand. There are lots of good reasons, but in really, really broad terms, evolution and development are those reasons. Now, when people then think about kind of this update, this brand evolution, we get a little bit, more into it then. So the reason behind it is super, super important, and that can really dictate how the rest of it goes. Now, we've got the obvious reasons, the evolution, a new direction. It could also be like a new era or a new chapter. And if you've had a brand that has been reputationally damaged in some way, it can be a useful thing to go, you know what, we've learned, we've moved on, we're starting afresh. This is a shiny new chapter, to help drop some of the potential negativity connected to an existing brand that has not done particularly well, that has perhaps generated negative publicity that is really difficult to shake. It could be a merger. If two companies have merged together, it would make sense perhaps to have one brand that covered both companies rather than just one brand and the other one gets dumped. It could be perhaps that your brand is maybe associated with or gets confused with someone else. This might be in a different space, or it might be that a brand has got perhaps negative publicity and people are getting their brand confused with yours. Or maybe even another brand has come out which is very similar or sounds very similar to yours, but it's associated with a product or service that is completely at odds with what you do, or even that aligns a bit too closely and people are getting confused. You might also find that as you grow, perhaps your business has developed away from your previous target audience, and therefore you want to change your brand and branding to reflect your new target audience to make sure it aligns really well with them. There's lots of reasons. Another one can be that you've got dating elements, not that they're literally going out for a date to, live happily ever after, but some things, particularly like fonts, can date really quickly and can make something seem a lot older than it is. If you look at some really old logos, logos of any of your favourite brands, you'll see often that small tweaks have been made to that logo over time to just keep things updated. It might be that you don't notice all of a sudden. It's not like it's gone from red to orange, or they're quite close actually, from red to blue, or it's changed its font completely. But fonts do have trends and they do move with the times, and you'll find that, letters become a little bit more rounded, or A's change quite often. And little things happen. Maybe they've got more sort of jagged edges, or they're cut slightly differently, or maybe a brand has developed its own font and they start to weave that in. So it's not a really big change, it's not a jarring change, it's not a dramatic change, but it is still a change that tends to show evolution and keeping up to date and being fresh and of the moment. Generally you don't want your brand to appear incredibly dated. There are some fonts, if you just look through whatever you use for graphic design, Canva for example, that do kind of have that medieval vibe. Now, if you are a brand that deals in medieval products, or that you do something connected to medievalness, that's not a word, then it makes sense to have that. But if you're not, it does look quite dating and quite old, and perhaps that you're not really with the times. So it's just something to be aware of. But the first point is, with any rebrand, is why are you doing it? That's a really important factor, because it will also help to inform your next step about how you're going to rebrand that. So for example, if you have a change of customer and your customers are a different age group, perhaps they're more female or more male, those kind of things might be taken into consideration with your change, with your new brand, and with the rebrand as well. Now, moving through to what on earth do you do? This will depend on all of the stuff we talked about before. And the advice, well, not the advice, the things I'm going to talk about here, that is not advice, it's observations based on what tends to go well for brands, what's harder work, what costs more, what's more obvious. So what you usually see are some consistent elements maintained. Now, the one example of where there isn't any consistent element maintained that I can see is with X and Twitter. Twitter has forever been a small blue bird. The blue is a specific blue that is associated with Twitter. The bird is obviously a Twitter bird. The bird has evolved over time. There is a really good campaign at the moment with a big company that shows the evolution of the little bird over time. So there are kind of key elements. You've got Twitter blue, you've got the name Twitter, and obviously tweets, and it all connects. The language we use particularly about Twitter is connected to the bird, tweeting, twittering, all of the, well, you say tweeting, don't you? But a retweet, those kinds of things. It's deeper than just the brand. So then to have that, and also like it's very rounded. The font was very kind of rounded, friendly, jolly. And now to go from that to black with a X on it is quite stark. And there aren't any things there that show that consistency. If you vanished off the planet for a week and came back, and like my phone now, the little logo of the Twitter app has completely changed to a black X, I still don't identify as Twitter when I'm kind of trying to find it. I'm like, where's it gone? Oh, it's black X now. So yes, there's usually consistent elements. Another example, I guess, is when Facebook rebranded to Meta. Now, obviously it's a completely different name. But if you look at the Facebook logo and the Meta logo side by side and the branding of it, because I have, you'll see that they clearly look, to my eye, that they come from the same family. The colours are the same. The fonts are the same. It's clearly not the same because one says Facebook and one says Meta, but you can see the kind of DNA running through it. If you look at logos of brands that you love, supermarkets, all their brands evolve, but there's those links back to the original brand. High street shops, designer stores, all sorts. There's usually that link. It might be the name, the colour, the font, the logo elements. There should be a link. It makes it much, much easier to explain to people and get them on board if there's still that link. Now, one example of this, which I think is a really positive one, is Apple, like the people that make the computers, phones, etc. Now, in 1977, according to my research, Apple started with the Apple logo, and it used to be a multicoloured rainbow logo, but it was in the shape of an apple with a bite out of it. Now, over time, that apple has changed colours and it's kind of slightly changed texture, I guess. But it is still, if you look on the back of your iPhone or your MacBook or whatever you own that's Apple, it will have that iconic Apple logo on it. The fonts have changed. There has been a development over time. The way that the brand presents itself has changed over time. But it still links back to that DNA of what Apple is, and people can then identify it quickly and can quickly connect with it and all the positive values. But we know that branding is much more than a logo, and when you rebrand, it isn't just about the logo. The logo is the biggest visual cue that something has changed, but it's not the whole story. It is the story behind why you're doing it, and that's why it's really important that if you do decide to rebrand, particularly if it's a dramatic one, if it's not just a refresh that shows that you want to have newer fonts because the old ones were dated, if it's a much more dramatic rebrand or one that visually is different, try and get everybody on board with it. Explain to them why you're doing it. Explain to them in an exciting way that shows evolution, growth, development, a new direction, a new chapter, a new trajectory. Why is it exciting to have that? That is a really, really important point, because if you can get people as enthused as you, or at the very least understanding the steps you take, it's going to make the whole process infinitely easier. And this starts with getting people in your team excited. If you've got a team, if you're a one-man band, then you're already excited. But then I would really urge you to take your fans, followers, customers along on the journey. Tell them that something exciting is coming. Talk to them about why it's happening. Make it exciting. Launch it properly. If you're putting the money into this, make it an opportunity that's going to work for you. Run a competition, run a giveaway, collaborate with people. Do something to launch the brand, particularly if you're a small business, in a way that allows you to make a big song and dance about it. Because it's nice to update things. It's good to keep, that refreshing there. Keep refreshing what you need to keep current and stay relevant. But make it into something exciting if that feels right, and you can therefore make more of a thing about it. We do rebrands to show so many things about ourselves that it's important that we communicate these, and a really great way of communicating it is to try and draw people's attention to it with a big song and dance, and to sound super excited about it, because hopefully if you've put that time, energy, money and thought into it, you will be. So they were just some thoughts on the rebrand, or our rebrand. Whether or not you decide to go for it is completely up to you. And of course, if you've had a brand that hasn't really worked out how you wanted it to, then if you want to launch a new brand, then it makes sense to go for a shiny new name and everything different, because it is a completely different chapter. What we were really talking about today was an existing brand that is looking to update for whatever reason. Why brands try and do that, why they do successfully do that, and also how you can get people involved too. So thank you very, very much today. If you've listened, please do let me know what you think. Have you seen any good rebrands? I'd love to know. I always like to see a good rebrand. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do screenshot, share to stories, or better still, if you've got a few moments spare, I'd be incredibly grateful if you'd review this podcast wherever you listen, whether that's Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. I'd be delighted. So thanks very much, and we will catch up next week. Take care.